Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Clerical Errors podcast. Its ongoing mission to explore strange confessional doctrines, to seek out new theological insights and ancient catechisms, to boldly go where no pastor has gone before.
You sound like you've been in space for like a decade and you've seen some stuff. You know, you sound pretty beat. And
Vicar,
I kind of like it.
Why did you have to interrupt him?
You're ruining the take, man.
I thought he was done.
Recorded live at Talks and Tasting Studios, it's the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you what's behind the collar. Let's go.
From the Talks and Tastings Studios, the outer space version, this is the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you
What's behind the collar?
This is Pastor Bollhagen.
This is Berg.
This is Vicar.
Welcome, and Peter's here.
Hey, Pete.
Welcome to the show.
We do something halfway unique, and you forget how to do a podcast. It's the same thing you have said 280 times, but we did something slightly different at the beginning, and you just forgot how to do it. That's awesome.
So, listener, we actually had about a 15-minute production meeting a couple of weeks ago where we said, let's shake things up. Let's do a theme episode. What do you want to do it on? Something that we're all experts on. Star Trek. Why did we pick Star Trek?
I think just because it's funny.
Threw a proverbial dart at the wall.
That's right.
There's so much Star Trek content. Like it'd be hard to not have content from Star Trek, you know?
Yeah, the reason why it appealed to me is I don't want to insult the listener here, but I just have this feeling that we have a lot of nerds who listen to our show.
The question is this going to be good or bad for the nerds? We might just offend everybody that listens.
That's right. Well, you know, that and because I'm a big Chewbacca fan.
Right, yeah.
Oh, man.
Live long and may the force be with you.
So I don't have a speed top 12 list, but because that would be illogical. But
Vicar, I appreciate that you brought in your Spock ears. I like it. I like the vibe.
yeah, it's a cool vibe.
So we want to get into our gags as much as possible. So first, we got to get the
You gotta get
all
the
the
text out of the
pastors-
way. That's what you're saying.
all the pastors that still need us to tell them what to preach on this
Right.
morning. We got to let them know.
Yes. So Vicar,
Nain, the final frontier.
yes.
Yeah, Widow of Nain from Luke 7. So it's Luke 7, verses 11 through 17. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country.
You know, sometimes I wish that there were certain things in the Bible that I'm just curious about, that it's just not there. I want to know, what do you guys think that his first words were?
Engage.
Engage. Yeah. Beam me up. Because I've actually been there when people have kind of come in a little bit out of surgery, and they can say some funny things. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know I'm one of them, so.
One of my favorite is, I wasn't even in the room, and I'm sitting with a family member. This was like 20 years ago. And I hear someone screaming the 23rd Psalm in King James from another room, and he thought he was dying and that he was on the verge of death, and it was like not even like an ankle surgery or something, you know, it wasn't anything. But as he was coming out, he was thinking that maybe he was dying, and so his solace was crying out the 23rd Psalm. Isn't that actually kind of cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
That also happened to me once, where someone was coming out of surgery, and I actually read to them the 23rd Psalm, because I like to do something in that situation where they're familiar with it. And she thought that I was, all of a sudden, as she's awake, she got really scared, because she thought you read the 23rd Psalm when someone is dying. And so she thought she was dying because I was reading the 23rd Psalm. So you live and learn.
Well, we'll be talking about that connection and association later on in this episode, so stay tuned, listeners.
Ooh.
Stay tuned. So I like this text because it is kind of Easter in September, right? In a lot of ways. At the same time, Jesus showing compassion, because this is really not about the man, although I guess you could say there does create a lot of question, like, what was that man doing? Right? That's why I kind of what did he experience? Anybody curious about that? Berg, what do you think?
I mean, you know, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. Thus makes the calamity of so long life.
Amazing.
So yes, everybody wonders what happens in the interim state.
Yeah. So, Vicar, what are your thoughts on this text?
Well, you see him coming to the town, and it's as if death is marching out of the town in victory.
Mm-hmm.
But it's met by the one who takes death onto himself by touching the bier.
Mm-hmm.
And it must have been a pretty despairing situation for the widow, because she's a widow and now her son is dead. So she's completely alone. And he has pity, and he raises her and takes that death onto himself. And I think this could be a good passage to read to someone, like when you're doing visits as well, or as you're preparing for death, because it does also show the value that the body has, too.
Right.
And that any of these resurrection accounts in Scripture, like the raising of Lazarus, it's good to show that the final thing we are awaiting isn't, to die and go to heaven with Jesus, although that's great.
Right.
But the ultimate thing we're awaiting is the resurrection of our bodies.
Yeah, how would that work if they, scattered the ashes on,
Gather him from the dust like Adam.
Yeah, he loved to fish, so we put his ashes in the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus kind of...
Then you have the little minnows coming up and gulp, gulp, gulp.
Right.
That's why you don't do that.
Yes. Because they will make them menders of fish. No? Okay. So I would say, from a practical standpoint, one thing that you can say is, and this was definitely an emphasis in the church from the beginning, is what did the early church do, the first Christians? They took care of widows and orphans, right? There is a very point of the church to take care of them, which is what Jesus does here. And I bet you this has part of that to do, of Jesus showing concern for those who really needed that kind of help. So that's one thing I think you can really bring out of this text, of learning from Jesus to care for those in need. Because what does it say? He had compassion. Right. Which I'm guessing, Berg, is this the feel it in your guts compassion? I believe it is.
Yeah, I think it's the splagetomai.
Right. So his compassion was as though he felt it himself. which is something I think we can learn to do as Christians, and that does come from grace, because if you're helping the widow so that you earn favor with God, you're not going to feel it in your guts, right? You're going to feel it in your desire for other things, really. So that's one thing I think you can say. Another thing that you can say then obviously is the fact that he does have the power over death. He controls life and death. And he, in that compassion, and I guess you could say he had compassion on the man. You don't know what state he was in at that point, So, what do you got, Berg?
Well, a lot. Well, first of all, we could talk about how Jesus has compassion, and yet he tells her to stop crying, which is very, very different than the modern psychologizing apart from Christ, where they say, just let it out, just let it out. Where Jesus' compassion has to do with conforming her mind to what reality really is, and what is the reality he is going to work. Well, the raising of this son. Paul says the same thing in 1 Thessalonians 4, that we should mourn, but not like those who don't have any hope. There is a sense in which people get overwrought and they mourn excessively, which is a sign of lack of faith or ignorance.
Yeah.
And so this is something Jesus actually tells her to stop doing. Stop clamoring. Stop wailing. That's
right.
The word there. The second thing you could do is
kind of like, since we're talking about like Star Trek, I was thinking about Airplane. Get a control of yourself, and they were lined up to.
Yeah, just right. The other thing you can talk about are the confessions of faith, and how they're right, but they're not exactly right. They still don't get it, even after they have witnessed somebody rising from the dead, which also shows up in Luke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.
Right. Yeah.
So, Law and the Prophets. I think the more interesting tact you could take, if you want to go a little more picturesque or typological, is it leaves the city gates. Now, the city gates show up a lot in the Bible. The first city gates, the first walled city, is created by Cain in order to protect himself because he doesn't trust in God's promise. You hear so much talk about possessing the gates of your enemies. The city gates are the places where business is conducted and where laws are passed and where deals are transacted. I mean, this is where, Abraham buys a plot for Sarah, is at the city gates as he is negotiating with the sons of Heth. Ruth, it's the same way. So what you see here time and time again is, the city gates are both, you could make this contrast between the evil city gates. Here this man is leaving a dead city, going to a dead city, to a literal necropolis, a place where the dead live. And yet Christ meets them at the gates and he turns it around. And he possesses the gates of his enemies, death, and that the gates of hell will not overcome even those who die in the Lord. And then you could go on to talk about the gates made of one pearl in Revelation, to which no evil thing or unclean thing will be allowed inside the new city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, good insight.
So,
you should have a podcast.
Hear you clucking, big chicken.
All right, so Vicar, tie this up in a Star Trekian way for us.
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know if I can do it, honestly.
All right, moving on.
Okay, I can do it.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the dead son at Nain goes where every man will go, but then he comes back, which no man has really done before. And indeed, this will be done fully in Jesus, who goes into death and yet comes back in a way in which none of the other resurrections do, right? So you could
Right.
argue in some ways he comes back from which no man comes back, right? Now, of course, there have been some resurrections. I'm not denying the other resurrections in the Bible. But at the same time, it's something that we do not experience. People don't typically come back from death. And this then foreshadows Jesus' own resurrection, from which he comes back from, and he shall never, ever die again. Death has no more dominion over him. Which then
Right.
is unlike all of the other resurrections previous. Whether it be Lazarus, this boy, the young girl, etc., etc. Because, Star Trek, 4, has that subtitle, The Undiscovered Country, and that's also from Hamlet's soliloquy, death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear the ills we have than fly to those we know not of. So, boom.
I'm constantly in awe.
To the listener, he doesn't have any notes when he does this.
He's just saying this stuff, man.
So,
All right.
So that hits Shakespeare, Star Trek, and Scripture. Boom.
What
Triple
was-
S.
What was your Shakespeare quote from?
Hamlet.
Hamlet.
Moving on.
Moving on. So, as part of our theme here, what I did to prepare was, there is, if anybody's been through the calling process as a congregation, and a pastor also understands this, there's two kind of main forms that a congregation gets from the list of pastors. One is the set form, where the pastor answers questions, and maybe I can answer some of those questions sometime in a further episode if we have a Star Trek 2 episode, which maybe we'll do, of how these certain pastors answer the question. But there also is what's called a PIF form, a personal information form. So I remember my call service, the sermon was, "What will your PIF say in 5 years?"
So I see you remember that one.
Yeah, well, I'm still thinking about it. So what I did is, this is actually a really fascinating exercise for me. So I picked 4 characters from Star Trek, and I envisioned them as pastors, what kind of pastors they would be. Okay?
Mm.
And then I wrote down, this is real, right? I got their PIF forms from their district president. Comments of the district president about each of these pastors.
Ha!
That's awesome.
So the first, obviously, would be Pastor James T. Kirk.
From where?
He is, I'll read.
Oh, okay.
So this is Pastor James T. Kirk. The district president writes, "As a circuit visitor of the Starfleet circuit, Pastor Kirk shows his strong leadership skills. He refuses to let fear dictate actions, but he strives to find light to others even in the darkest of times. He deals with his congregation with compassion and understanding, believing that God has given strength to overcome any obstacles. He understands that sometimes we must go into the unknown while trusting God's word as its foundation. Pastor Kirk works well with multicultural situations and is good at creating a sense of community. His preaching style is energetic, using a bit of sense of humor, but also very deliberate and dramatic. His weaknesses: Pastor Kirk tends to be a little bit impulsive and has visions of grandeur and building plans. I wouldn't leave him alone with certain LWML groups, and he can be a little impetuous if he doesn't get his way."
Music fade out.
Nice. Spot on.
Right? It's kind of funny, like, that you could tell Star Trek is a good show in the sense of I could literally, like, imagine him as a pastor when I was going through this. You know what I mean? In a weird way. Couldn't you? Like, as you think about it, like what kind
Absolutely.
of pastor what kind of pastor he would be? Right? So I have another Piff form. This is of Pastor Spock, obviously. So you want to hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Pastor Spock, as a recent graduate of Concordia Theological Seminary, Pastor Spock has a strong command of both the Hebrew and the Greek. Pastor Spock was raised in an atheistic home founded on logic, but he deducted that atheism in the end wasn't logical, knowing that even he had questions that he could not answer. If something doesn't square with Scripture, Pastor Spock will speak up, knowing, as he puts it, understanding and compassion are important parts of our ministry, so he deals with clarity, truth, without getting emotional. Pastor Spock is dedicated, sometimes to the detriment of himself. As he also puts it, the needs of the congregation come first. It is my duty to serve with dedication and integrity, ensuring our actions align with our faith. Pastor Spock is not an emotional preacher, but very clear and concise, and reflects an unwavering stance of biblical doctrine and the Lutheran confessions. Weaknesses. Several pastors have blacked out during ordinations when he gave his blessing for some reason. He doesn't like. He doesn't
Subtle,
really like.
subtle. I love it.
He doesn't really like sentimental hymns. He especially likes Martin Luther, but even Paul Gerhardt makes him a little nervous.
Good work.
Nice.
Now, as I read that, you probably had I kind of know what Spock would be like, right? Is he thinking about? I think Spock would be an amazing pastor, wouldn't he? A lot of people appreciate his. Now he would drive some people crazy, right?
But so would Kirk. I mean,
right.
The idea in that he embodies the spirit rather than the letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he wins an unwinnable game with the, what is it called? The Kobayashi Maru, I think it's called.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll be honest, you know more about Star Trek than I do. All right, next pastor Piff form from his district president, Reverend Montgomery Scott. Pastor Scotty, as his congregation knows him, is a grizzled veteran of the cross. He has done some work in conflict resolution and is a very practical problem solver. Pastor Scotty excels in the practical nature of the ministry and is a ready and willing voice whenever a member needs him. He also understands deeply the cross, knowing that challenges can bring you to the brink of disaster, but somehow by God's grace, the gospel continues to stand firm in the darkness. Pastor Scotty is very approachable, is willing to share a pint with someone who really needs it, and he refuses to leave the sheep stranded as someone dedicated in his service as a pastor. His sermons are delightful, honest, and realistic. Weaknesses. He can be a little earthy in his language, and he can also get a little preoccupied with the church's sound system and the quality of the church's internet. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I don't know the characters real well. I was just kind of going. Did it feel like I understood Scott?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. We can tie it all together after the final guy.
All right. The fourth one. Reverend Khan Anamian Singh.
Of course.
Reverend
of course.
Khan?
Of course I did.
All right, let's go.
All right. Reverend Khan has bounced around the synod quite a bit, serving many different parishes. He can be charismatic and extremely ambitious. Although he has run for many district offices over the years, he has come up short, as he can be a little intense. He has many very dedicated supporters, willing to put their life on the line to follow his extremely intricate plans for his church. Although his ideas are viewed as dangerous at times, He really does, in his heart, believe he is doing what is right for his congregation and his church. Weaknesses. He has rubbed some of the other pastors in his circuit the wrong way. He is confrontational and prone to being argumentative, but sometimes that is needed, the district president says. So that one I'm not really as comfortable with, but because I don't know. That's a guy, Ricardo Montalban, right?
Yes. Also played by Benedict Cumberbatch in the Chris Pine ones.
Oh, yes.
The reboots.
Yep.
So those are the 4 PIF forms.
I really like Star Trek in that, really the fact that you have really a triad rather than simply individuals. You've got Kirk, you've got Spock, and you've got McCoy, a.k.a. Bones. And McCoy isn't one you really talked about, but Spock is kind of the mind, the rationality. McCoy is the heart, which is why those two clash and rib each other a lot. And yet, Kirk is kind of this mediating figure who is able to be flexible enough to not only embody the laws, but also the spirit of the law.
Right.
And so he'll actually break the law in order to keep the law, which is what I like about it because, using your thing for PIF sets, pastors aren't individuals. They actually work the best when they work together in groups, like circuits. If you have circuits that work together,
right,
and then circuits make districts, districts make synods. And we should actually be working together using our varied talents and predispositions in order to succeed at not our 5-year mission, but our eternal mission.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with the 310 emphasis. Pastors, old pastors like me think that's pretty funny right now.
Well, because that's the problem is we cut out the older pastors. There's a lot of intergenerational warfare. You get the stuff, okay, boomer, all that kind of nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Which is bunk. Star Trek, for all of its flaws, shows a crew that is very, very different from each other who are forced to work together for the common good.
Yes.
They have to put aside their own preferences and their own ideas in order to survive. And I think this is a great lesson for the church today, is that, hey, we need to actually work together. Kirk is not just some crazy guy who flies off the handle and everything. He actually that's actually McCoy. But McCoy is in the perfect spot because he's not in charge. He's like the conscience. He is the moral instinct that informs Kirk.
And another thing is they are all very willing to listen to each of their opinions and expertise. You know what I mean? They might argue about it sometimes, but they tend to recognize their own weakness sometimes and defer.
Right. Bones, he says it all the time, right? He's like, dang it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a whatever, right?
Right.
And, I've used that a lot where I'm like, dang it, Jim, I'm not, I'm a theologian, not a da-da-da, right? And that's important. Like, we defer to Peter when it comes to, that's why this podcast works. Because if we were at each other's throats all the time, we'd never get anything done.
We are kind of like the ship, right? We got Peter, the producer.
In some ways, right? Yes, right?
Right. So who's who then?
Are you saying that I'm the captain, or am I like Scotty?
I'd say you're like Scotty. You keep everything running. Without you, this would fall apart. This would not work at all.
Yeah, I'm down in the bottom yelling up at the captain on the bridge with the duct tape in one hand and
Right.
A screwdriver in the other.
And then you have, I'm only the vicar.
Yeah, I cannot give it anymore. So, unfortunately, the vicars are kind of red shirts.
Yep.
I mean, we know they're going to come and go. It's just,
Right. I guess, would I be Kirk and you be Spock?
Yeah, I think that would. I think that works.
I think that makes sense.
What about Hannah?
Hannah.
So Vicar, you don't even know who Hannah is, do you?
No.
Hannah, the poor vicar doesn't know about you. So you might want to. So we have what's called a podcast mom who started out as a listener.
Peter, edit this out.
Okay.
And she would correspond enough that we kind of made her part of the show whenever she wants to interject and guide our topics and ask questions. And she actually also, she has a vicar. I'm not sure. He's at the university in St. Paul.
I mean, I didn't know she had her own personal vicar.
In Minnesota?
That's
Yeah.
pretty rad.
Actually, if it's the one I'm thinking of, I think the one there now currently is a close friend of mine.
Oh,
Is that the one with campus ministry?
yes.
Yep. He's just in my kind of close friend group at the seminary.
Oh, so Hannah, say hi to the vicar.
I would say
our vicars are besties.
best.
Totes.
I would say Hannah
How am I
is a
gonna edit
mixture
this?
of Bones and Uhura. So that's where
Okay.
I'm going. Probably more Bones
go.
than Uhura.
She's
Because
like
she doesn't say a lot,
she's kind of like a reoccurring character. Kind of pokes in and out when,
Yeah.
She's the Borg.
Well, good work.
Moving on.
So, I mean, that's the thing too is, we've talked about how it's a team, not individuals. And I
Right.
think far too many pastors view it as individuals. I guess the other thing we could actually talk about is, delight in your pastor's strengths. There are Spock fans who really like his rationality, but, they don't talk about his weaknesses. They're like, well, they don't go around saying, well, Spock's just really cold and, kind of unapproachable and da-da-da-da-da, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, everyone in their mind wants a certain pastor, and it's kind of want a combination of all these guys in one person, But every pastor's going to have their own gifts and strengths and talents.
And you know what? You might want a Kirk, but then you get a Chekhov. So what? Live with it.
That's right.
He doesn't know. That's okay.
I don't know. I prepared. I didn't watch a lot of Star Trek for the show, okay?
You had like 2 weeks, man.
All right, let's move on. By the way, if the listener wants, I am willing to go do this a little further. Well, the other idea is to take a couple of questions that are from the actual set form and answer them as these 3 characters or 4 characters. That might be kind of fun. If that is the case, listener, if you want some questions to ask each of these pastors, Vicar, where can they get a hold of us?
You can email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/clericalerrorspodcast. We have a Twitter, Clerical Errors P.
P for podcast.
P for podcast. And we have a Patreon at patreon.com/clericalerrorspodcast.
Bollhagen, you forgot something. It's very egregious. You didn't mention where Kirk was from.
I asked where he was from, and you didn't say.
You didn't say. Do you know?
I don't know. Is he
He
from
is
Humboldt?
from
Dumont?
Riverside, Iowa.
I did not know that. I had forgotten.
It is the future birthplace of Captain James T. Kirk.
Wow.
And that is in rural Washington County, Iowa, along the English River on Iowa Highway 22. The population is 1,060 people at the time of the 2020 census. So
that's a real place.
it is a real place. And there's actually a plaque at Captain Kirk's future birthplace. He was born March 22nd, 2228.
Wow.
So, if you guys want to get a tour together to visit it, and then we can have like a clerical errors. Yeah, we could do matins there. There we go.
They even have a mark, the future birthplace. That's nice. And then we can go to, I don't know, wherever Spock was born.
I think that's a different planet, right?
I think we might have a little more trouble getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that on Google Maps?
I mean, we can
York.
talk to Elon Musk and see if we can borrow one of his rocket ships.
He actually grew up in the Panhandle.
All right, Vicar.
Vicar.
You have something. What have you prepared for Star Trek episode?
Well, I watched the original unaired, or at least initially unaired, pilot of Star Trek called The Cage. And I remember I saw it once I think I was in high school or something, kind of as a rerun. And I remember really liking it. So I thought...
Where can you watch it? Is it on YouTube?
Oh, wherever you can stream the rest of Star Trek, it's on there.
I want to say that's Paramount Plus.
I think you're right. Yeah. The TV studio rejected this pilot because they thought it was a little too cerebral and that there wasn't enough action. I thought the action in it was pretty good, but I guess NBC didn't. And Captain Kirk actually isn't in this because it's kind of like, it's almost like looking at a rough draft, but it's still really good.
Did they not have the actor picked out for it yet?
No, it was a totally different character. I mean, you can kind of see how he's like the type of Captain Kirk, right?
Sure.
Captain Kirk is the antitype. And Spock is there, and Spock actually smiles because his character wasn't fully fleshed out yet, so he kind of shows emotion in a couple scenes. It's really interesting. So I want to talk about see it as a cultural commentary on modern society. So it's not going to be funny like Pastor Bollhagen's, unfortunately, but you know.
We'll find a way to laugh at it.
I'm
worry.
sure. Yeah, you just laugh at me. Worst case scenario.
We'll just cry as we put on our clown makeup.
So the character in it is Captain Pike. It's not Captain Kirk, and he wants to resign from being captain. And
can I hold you there for a minute?
Yes.
So there's actually a new series out with Captain Pike.
Oh, cool! I should watch it. Is it good?
I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
But
he wants to resign because he's tired of having to make all these tough calls that people's lives hold in the balance and, you know, feeling the weight of the consequences of some of those actions. And he talks about how he has a whole galaxy of options of places he could go. He could go home, you know, where he was raised riding horses or whatever, or he could go do anything, anywhere. But after that happens, they are getting this like signal from this supposed crash that was on this planet, and they do end up going down. There appears to be a number of survivors there. Most of them are kind of older at this point because it's been, I think, like 18 years. People appear to be in like their 70s or whatever. But there is one girl who was like very young when they landed, and so she's like 20, and you know, they kind of set her up to be a love interest type thing. But what ends up happening is it's a trap, and that the people, with the exception of the girl, the other people in the crash weren't actually real because everyone else died. And there's this other civilization that lives underground on the planet with like these really big pulsing brains. They take Captain Pike captive, they take him underground, and what this civilization happened to them is that there was a war on the surface of the Earth, so they had to go underground. And to kind of keep themselves occupied, they had to develop the ability of illusion. So they would like dig into memory archives from their civilization, like live different people's lives. But what happened eventually was they lost the ability to repair their own technology. So it's kind of this paradox that on the one hand, they're so smart and their brains are so developed. But yet on the other hand, they it talks about how they can't repair the ships that their fathers built. What they're trying to do with Captain Pike and this girl is they want to create basically a race of slaves. And so down in this lair, they have like all these different species, but they haven't been able to find a species that's suitable. But they're very hopeful that it'll work out with Captain Kirk because, you know, they have such a good catalog of, Captain Pike, because humans have such a good catalog of memories that they can choose from. So they're trying to get him to fall in love with this woman, and, you know, she's very beautiful. And so they'll create these illusions for them, like, oh, he's back at his home where he rode horses, because they can access his memories. And they try to set her up. It very much plays on the trope of Adam and Eve. It's very Edenic. They try to get him to become protective of her by going to his memory catalog of this soldier that he defeated when he was on another planet, and they put her there, so he has to defend her. And he gets her to talk eventually, and if they don't do what they want them to do, they are able to punish them and cause like severe pain through their body, part of the illusion thing. So she's kind of, you know, she's been there for, 20 years at this point, or 18 years. She's really worn down. She knows in her mind that there's not really any sort of way out. But Captain Kirk... Captain Pike, he cannot stand the fact that it isn't real and that they're in a state of captivity. So what eventually ends up happening is the species accesses the ship's database, and they realize that humans, above all else, can't stand captivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually they let them free. But the girl doesn't go with Captain Pike back up to the ship because she was actually extremely disfigured in the crash. They just made her look beautiful, but she's like, there's nothing for me out there. So I will, just live this fantasy life where I can pretend to be with you and their illusions. I think it's a very relevant show in that there's this dichotomy between reality versus illusion, and using, dreams or fantasies as a drug. And, being a society that's so advanced, like in our world, we have our phones in our pockets that can do anything we want, but none of us really have any idea how we would build that on our own if we had to. And so there's this thing of that the dreams themselves, and trying to search and return to Eden on your own, actually becomes a prison that further enslaves you and kind of traps you in your state of not being able to do anything. They can't be original anymore. That the species can't actually create anything. They're always going back and reliving the same memories over and over again. And there's also the theme of finding peace and happiness at a moral expense. Because I mentioned the beginning of how Captain Pike wants to resign because he's looking just for a peaceful life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it's kind of offered to him here, except it isn't real. But if in order for him, even if he could get over the fact that it's not real,
Mm-hmm.
it would morally destroy him, because then he would be creating a race of slaves by procreating with this woman. So it's this idea that in trying to create this sort of perfection on your own, you create further moral problems. And then, there's also the theme of the irony of growing intelligence, but kind of losing basic capabilities, stuff like that. So,
right.
Yeah, based on this, what do you guys think? How do you think this might be relevant to, our society as a whole? Kind of want to get you guys involved in it.
I think we're in the same boat, because I don't think we can go to the moon anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say too, yeah. Like
I think we've actually lost, we might have gotten smarter in some ways, but it is a sort of very specialized way, which then inhibits us from actually innovating and creating. There have been so many podcasts on the decadent age and that sort of thing, that we're actually living in a decadent age right now. And that most of our advancements in technology have actually been refinements and not actual leap forwards. So, I don't know. Very interesting.
And then the mere fact that, I heard someone said, like, if for example our power grid was attacked and we lost power for an extended year, someone said after a year we would lose a huge percentage of our population out of starvation. I don't know if that's true or not.
It wouldn't even be a couple weeks.
Yeah,
people starved.
Yeah, and in 2 weeks, millions of people would be dead. Millions.
I heard like the Northeast U.S., within 48 hours, it would run out of food.
Yeah. So that's the technological side of this.
Yeah.
The moral side is actually, I think, more interesting, and we actually have a more modern way of talking about this with the red pill versus blue pill, which, Vicar, is from the
Matrix.
There we go. Right.
Which say some of the same ideas there, obviously.
Yeah.
Are we gonna take, well, and it doesn't even have to be Matrix E for it to be true. It's like anyone who lives a false existence is taking the blue pill. It's what the Freudians call the reality principle as opposed to the pleasure principle. And I just did some Googling here, and the last words that the keeper says to Pike are these: "She has an illusion and you have reality. May you find your way as pleasant."
Yeah. Actually, I did write that down, but I never got to it. And there's another line from Captain Pike where he says, "You either live life, bruises, skin, knees, and all, or you turn your back on it and start dying."
Yeah.
And, I think, like, you kind of see this with, like, this is just one example, but, like, people, like, have AI friends or whatever. Like, you chat with something, or, you have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend. And it's like you're trying to search for this counterfeited version of, perfection that ultimately not only won't make you happy, but is actually morally detrimental to everyone else around you. Because now the fabric of society is decaying.
Yeah, so many people live false existences, and this was actually the reason for Goethe and the Sturm und Drang movement. It was to get away from false mannerisms and that sort of stuff. I would say today we actually live a greater false existence than any of our ancestors previous, with the very fact that we don't actually know where our food comes from.
Right.
Yeah.
Very few of us actually know how meat makes it to the grocery store or eggs. And because we are so removed from the very basic fundamental processes of life, I mean, we actually have to have signs up here in Wyoming: "Don't touch the fluffy cows."
Right.
Don't try to go take a selfie with a bear.
I have another example of this, is something that we saw through the pandemic, is the idea that, well, online church is about as good.
Yeah.
Where if you really think of the sacraments, one of the essential part of the sacraments is the physical nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
In the eating and drinking, or the water, or you look at the miracles. We didn't have not long ago, we had a miracle of Jesus using his saliva to restore someone's
How about the very
hearing and
fact that he
speech.
touched a dead body? Like
Yeah.
from our text today. To touch a
Right.
dead body is wrong. It's uncomfortable. It's weird. It's weird touching dead flesh because it's not the way it's supposed to be. It's cold. It's clammy. It is a very, very not cool experience. And then for the Jews, you go even further, and it's like there's ceremonial uncleanness involved with it, right? And yet Jesus touches the beer.
So I have a kind of a interesting way of looking at this. Would you suppose that, say you are an atheist who saw that episode, do you think that they would see this as a commentary on religion?
Depends on what kind of atheist they are.
They well, I was doing some research on what people's thoughts on this episode are. Some people do take it as like an anti-religious narrative of like, oh, you're trying to return to Eden by engaging in these fantasies, and the punishment as depicted in when they don't obey is like they're burning in flames. Like that's the kind of feeling that they have, like they're in hell. I read that before I'd watched the episode, so I was kind of disappointed. Maybe thinking I didn't pick the right one. Then I watched it. I didn't kind of get that anti-religious tone from watching the episode itself. That's not to say that maybe it could be there, especially since the person who wrote this was atheist, but I really don't think it was the main point if it's there. I think it's more of a commentary on technological advancement and, the age of decadence, like Pastor Berg was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think it shows the flaws in this sort of what they call solipsism. Sort of, well, I can exist in illusion and in my own memory. Well, what does it do for these people? It traps them.
Yeah.
They can't build starships anymore. They can't get away.
And when Pike goes back up, they're kind of, at this point, they've tried it with so many species, they've kind of just accepted the fact that, our race is doomed now.
Right.
But
and that's the thing is, like, I think Roddenberry, even though he is an atheist, is showing that this sort of radical skepticism that, oh, well, illusion is the same thing as reality. It just doesn't work. It eventually damns you. It damns you to obscurity. It damns you to decadence. It damns you to ultimately to irrelevance and to stagnation and death, both spiritually and physically.
There was this kind of reminds me of, I can't remember, it was in some book I read. I don't know where it was, but he kind of made the argument of, just as, if any of us were put on an island and we were told to get off the island, you had to build like a microwave or something. We couldn't do it. Same idea as this. But then he made the argument that that's also where we're at with our morality, is that we've inherited, this Christian ethic that's kind of, it's degrading, but you still have the residual, ripples of it. And, even the quote unquote, even the people that hate Christianity, think they have this idea of, treat others as, you would want to be treated. But if they had to start from scratch and all their memories were erased or something, they wouldn't be able to create that ethic.
Right, which is another great movie called Dark City, where that actually happens.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah, because ultimately, this is an epistemological, that's why the NBC people didn't like it. Because how do you know what's real?
Right.
What is real? And if it gives you pleasure, why wouldn't you take that? Which seems to be at the basis of our entire consumerist culture.
I mean,
so it's dangerous. This is why the only one who comes back from this entire pilot is Leonard Nimoy. Nobody else is, this is dangerous because if people actually take this to heart, I have to take the hard road.
Yeah.
Well, people will do it. They're like, it's better to be real than to have this fake pleasure. Oh, maybe I don't have to buy these things that the TV ads are telling me to buy. Uh-oh. Now we can't sell anything anymore. Right? I mean, it is. It's not that it's cerebral. It's dangerous. This strikes at the very heart of 1960s and 1970s advertisements.
Yeah, it's good.
I love it.
Yeah, I love this episode.
And this whole discussion reminds us, I mean, we by nature are always gravitating towards the easiest and fastest way of doing things.
Yeah.
And which means we don't always know how to do things. And, I think, for example, writing skills are going to soon will be gone, for example, Yeah. I say that because Peter, my son, he always amazes me, the producer. He always amazes me because if you think you have like a fast way of doing things, I guarantee you he has a faster way of doing it. Tell me that's not your spiritual gift, Peter.
It's just repetition. Get the reps in,
Right.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, in order to live in this society, you have found, Peter, I'm sure you found ways to improve from where we are now to when we started the podcast, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just in the tools that we use alone, right?
But that's the thing, we have all adapted to our surroundings, right? We are products of our environment. And so there are a lot of things that we just don't simply need to know to survive. And this is why in collapse of empire or anything else, the best thing you can have is a community where everybody knows particular skills so you can keep everybody alive. Because if you try to live on your own and do everything, you will never, ever develop as a moral, spiritual person. You will simply be a beast of burden, just trying to live and survive and get through the day.
Yeah.
So that's where preppers who think they're going to go off in the woods and just kind of make her work, well, you need a community. We were never meant to not be in community with one another.
Yeah. So, Berg, what did you prepare then for this Star Trek episode?
What I have is actually my second favorite episode of Star Trek that I've watched, and it is entitled Darmok. It's the 102nd episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, the second episode of the 5th season. So I'm getting outside of the original series to Picard and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So this is what I want to talk about here. Here's the pilot of the episode. The Enterprise makes contact with a Tamarian ship in orbit around the planet El Adril. The Tamarians have been previously contacted by the Federation, but they could not be understood. The Universal Translator translates their words, but they communicate by using brief allusions to their history and mythology in order to convey their thoughts and intentions. Likewise, the Tamarians cannot understand Captain Picard's straightforward use of language. Picard slowly deduces that Darmok and Jalad were warriors who met on the island of Tanagra and were forced to unite against a dangerous beast there, becoming friends in the process. Dathan tried to recreate this event with Picard, hoping to forge a friendship through shared adversity. Picard recounts for Dathan the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that parallels the allegory of Darmok and Jalad. Dathan seems to understand the story but succumbs to his injuries. Picard later reads the Homeric hymns, explaining to Riker that studying their own mythology may help them relate to the Tamarians. He mourns that Dathan sacrificed himself in the hope of communication and wonders if he would have done the same. So it's a very interesting episode in that this whole species, this culture, talks in allusions. So it'd be like if we would say, John Henry. Okay. John Henry with his hammer. And that means...
He signed a lot of stuff?
That's John Hancock. Or
I've made that joke before, Vicar.
Yeah, I know. Right? So, John Henry, a young George Washington with the cherry tree.
Telling the truth.
Right. What's another one? The writing on the wall.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable, right? It's going to happen, right? Which is from the book of Daniel. I know I've talked about some of these things before. Or your Achilles heel.
Greatest weakness.
Greatest weakness. Right? So this is a culture that talks exclusively in historical and mythological allusions or parables or whatever, right?
Because the parable people don't understand and some do.
Right. They tell stories, and you need to actually be in the story. You need to understand the story in order to understand the illusion, because they don't actually tell the whole story every time. They just say Darmok and Jalad at the walls, or Shaka when the walls fell.
All right. Or sometimes how we pastors
You know?
can use theological kind of jargon without actually explaining, and sometimes people don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Well, and this is exactly where I wanted to go, right? Is in the Missouri Senate, I think sometimes we're like the Tamarians. Maybe Vicar feels this way or doesn't. I don't know. I haven't had an opportunity to listen to I had company, so I haven't been able to listen to your journey to Lutheranism yet, so.
That's fine.
But, I mean, was the terminology difficult when you came to the Missouri Senate?
No, actually, I don't think so.
Really? Okay.
I think what's confusing more for me is kind of like how the synod itself functions. A lot of that is still a mystery to me, and I
Still
really
a mystery to most of us, so.
Yeah. And people say like, oh, like a winkle or whatever. More of that like structural type stuff, structural terminology that initially I didn't know what anyone was talking about. But the theological terms, I didn't have as much of a problem with.
Because you can study it in a book, right?
Yeah.
Or talk with others about it. But that sort of ethos, that sort of way of life, the term winkle, do you know what that means, Vicar?
Now I do.
Well, a winkel originally in German means a corner.
Okay.
Because that's where the pastors would meet. They would go and meet in the corner. And that can, and we use it in a term of, okay, this is when the pastors get together and they talk theology, they talk shop, they talk business for the circuit, the district, whatever. Now, in Luther, a Winkelprediger, a winkle preacher, is a sneak preacher. That's how we translate it. It's someone who sneaks in without a call and begins to preach. So it's very interesting that the different sort of contexts and the way in which we use words. That shows up even in Lutheranism. We who so pride ourselves on objectivity. So, well, and that's the thing. I think that is also a comfort to people who actually want to become a part of who we are and what we do. It's going to take a while because particular things that will be mentioned, you don't know.
Right.
And you have to learn. Because the main thing is communication. This should help pastors, be a warning to pastors when they preach. It should be a comfort to those who want to be a part of our fellowship. And it should also be an exhortation to those who are already a part of our fellowship. It's kind of like at the end here, Picard is later reading the Homeric hymns, explaining to Riker that studying their own mythology may help them to relate to the Tamarians. Now, mythology, whatever, whatever word you use, but actually studying the past, studying the way in which cultures spoke to one another, seeing the difference between the Iliad and the Odyssey, the sort of turns of phrase that are used, building that in your own mind, being a part, knowing, and not just being a part, but knowing that you are a part of Christendom, a Christendom that has been passed down to you by your parents, that is exemplified primarily for us in the United States, for example. Like, we should love our country. We should know songs like Yankee Doodle. Mm-hmm. We should know who John Henry is. We should know, and this is all the secular stuff, right? We should actually know Paul Bunyan. We should know who these guys are. We should know our mythology because it tells us something about what our values and our virtues are. But most importantly, we should know the Bible. We should be so conversant in the Bible that we should never have to preach on the Old Testament. And in the old days, there was no Old Testament reading. People should, I want us to get to the point where people don't even need to hear the Old Testament read because they know it so well that when you mention it, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
That is a defect in us that we have to add in the Old Testament readings.
Goes back to Captain Pike. You have to, go back and just not assume, that people know it.
Yeah, I think, because I'm doing the Bible study on Matthew, I think that's definitely one thing that stands out is people like the writings of Paul, for example, like Romans, because it's the closest thing we have to systematic theology. It's much more on the nose, so it's a little more, spoon-fed, for lack of a better term. But then you have someone...
Let's be honest. The Missouri Senate is more Spock than it is McCoy.
Yeah. And you read, the Gospel of Matthew, and you start looking at, the quotations that Matthew has, also looking at the typological allusions. It's so dense, and it's so beautiful, but if you just, plop it down in front of someone, you're like, read this, and then, what is he trying to convey? It's kind of like, they don't really get it,
Yeah. No, I hear you. And this is where we are not even the Tamarians. I wish we were. I wish we were so conversant with the Bible itself that we could say things like old as Methuselah.
Right.
Or, is Saul among the prophets? And if you don't know that one, Google it.
And I would say, too, kind of, since you brought up Paul, is I see Paul in this, too, because Paul was exactly trying to deal with all these different cultures and getting them to understand and communicate and understand the gospel.
Right. But at the same time, Paul just lives and he breathes and he sweats the Bible.
Right.
And that's just something that a lot of our training is cerebral. It actually is the critique of that first episode. The Missouri Senate oftentimes is so cerebral, and that means we demote faith into propositions that need to be assented to, which is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But where's the Kirk? That could be the title for the episode.
Where's the Kirk?
I like it.
I mean, where is the knowledge combined with the passion?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about how Scripture should be the Christian's playground, kind of, and that's in one thing of you need to find the delight in Scripture, especially that's where a lot of the actual learning in theology happens. Is just read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, for example, and see how many typological observations you can make, and just in a way kind of have fun with it. Don't worry about getting the answer per se,
Well, and I think that's even too cerebral at this point. I would love it if people just started using it in common conversation, what you will do quickly. Or, bad company corrupts good morals. Or, my life is bundled, that there's a bundle of life, as Abigail is saying to David, right?
Right.
But the main thing is that we live and breathe Scripture, that everything that we do and everything that we say and everything that we think should be conformed to the Word of God. It'd be great if people just spoke in sentences from God's Word. Could you imagine that?
All right, there's your assignment.
Oh,
that sounds like a top 12 new phrases created by Berg that we need to, as a clerical heirs army, include in our
daily
everyday
speech.
discourse.
Okay.
You got that?
I like
you can do
this.
that.
Okay.
That's a speed top 12.
He'll want to. No, Berg's not capable of a speed top 12 list. That's.
Don't tempt me.
They're to have too much
Don't
thought.
tempt me.
All right. I'm getting tired, people. I think this journey, this must come to an end before our next adventure in a week.
Does it feel like a 5-year expedition?
It is really. It feels It's hard to believe this podcast, so long, so many journeys, so many episodes,
So many Vicars.
so many Vicars.
So many Vicars.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. This is Bollhagen.
This is Berg.
This is Vicar.
And may your district president give enough thought in your PIF form as I did in Spock's.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Questions, thoughts, concerns? You can contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/Clerical Errors Podcast, on Twitter at Clerical Errors P for podcast, or email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. Thanks for listening to Clerical Errors. See you next time.